Hey, tonight, we begin a different kind of story. Not just history, but a living legend. Julius Caesar. Just 2 words, yet they summoned daggers in the dark. Golden laurel wreaths, and a republic teetering on the edge of empire. But what exactly made him unforgettable? It wasn't just that he conquered Gaul. Not just that he crossed the Rubicon and rewrote Roman destiny. It was because he understood power. How to seize it, shape it, and wear it like a second skin. So before we dive into this epic journey, do one small thing. If this feels like the kind of place you'd return to each night, feel free to like and subscribe. But only if you truly connect with what I'm creating here. And let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. In the comments, one gentle note. Your screen will gradually fade to black. It's not broken, it's intentional. Because even soft light can trick your brain into thinking the day isn't over. It suppresses melatonin, the hormone that helps you sleep deeply, peacefully. So instead, let the darkness wrap around you. Let the sound lead the way. Sink into your pillow and breathe a little slower. Caesar is waiting, with ambition in his veins and betrayal in the air. And you're about to become part of it. Rome never lacked drama, but on December 15th, 37 AD, a new chapter began, with screams and a backward baby. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus was born at the imperial villa in Antium, a name that already sounded like a challenge to fate. And fate, as usual, wasn't playing fair. His mother was Agrippina the Younger, daughter of the legendary Germanicus, niece of Emperor Caligula, great-granddaughter of Augustus himself. Royal blood flowed in her veins like poison in ceremonial wine. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, was a gloomy man with a reputation equal parts ambition and scandal. He'd served as consul in 32 AD, but by 36 he was accused of incest with his sister, Domitia Lepida, and adultery with the noblewoman Albusilla. Thanks to Caligula's rise to power after Tiberius's death, Gnaeus escaped with his neck, though not his dignity. That was the world Nero was born into, and born backward, literally, a breech birth that nearly killed his mother. Pliny the Elder recorded it grimly. Only one breech-born man had succeeded in life, General Marcus Agrippa. The rest, flaming disasters. Yet amid the blood and agony, Agrippina held her composure. A court astrologer foretold that her son would one day be emperor, but that he would also murder his mother. She didn't cry. She smiled and whispered, "Let him kill me, only let him rule." Roman motherhood, where ambition came swaddled in silk. At just 2 years old, Nero's life went downhill. Agrippina was accused of plotting against her brother, the charmingly deranged Caligula. She was exiled to the island of Pontia, a kind of eternal vacation package for disgraced nobility. Nero was left behind with his father, but not for long. In January of 41 AD, Gnaeus Domitius succumbed to dropsy, just like that. Nero was orphaned, politically and literally. He was sent to live with his aunt, Domitia Lepida, mother of the future Empress Messalina. She cared for him, but Caligula had stripped the family of their wealth. Nero, of royal blood, grew up like a pauper in a palace. While the child adjusted to a downgraded lifestyle, Rome spun its dice again. On January 24th, Caligula was assassinated in a palace hallway. Claudius, his nervous, stammering uncle, stumbled into the role of emperor, literally hiding behind a curtain when the guards found him. Claudius did what no one expected. He undid some of Caligula's madness. One of his first acts, he recalled Agrippina from exile. Perhaps out of mercy, perhaps out of fear, or perhaps because even emperors get tired of being haunted by family ghosts. Agrippina returned with the dignity intact. No one questioned her time on the island. She had one mission, her son and power. Domitia Lepida handed the boy back. Agrippina didn't shed tears. She initiated a plan. First, education. Not the sweet lullabies of maternal care, but a crash course in politics, survival, and subtle manipulation. She hired tutors, appointed Beryllus and Anicetus, two freedmen, as supervisors. Nero wasn't just a son, he was her imperial startup. But Agrippina wasn't just thinking of books, she was thinking of husbands. In 41, she tried to woo Galba, a high-ranking general. He rejected her, so she pivoted. New target, Passienus Crispus, rich, old, and inconveniently married to her cousin, Domitia the Elder. Shortly after, Domitia died unexpectedly. No questions were asked. Agrippina married Crispus without delay. It was a marriage of power, money, and again, power. Love had no seat at the table. He lived a few more years. Then in 47 AD, he too died. His will left everything to Agrippina. She didn't mourn, but all of Rome took notice. Nero, now 10, had a mother with wealth, influence, and eyes fixed on the imperial throne. As for him, he was learning how to smile at enemies, how to compose poetry, and how to survive in an empire where betrayal came by knife, by word, or by law. If there's any historical era you wouldn't want to be cast in, it's the Caligula administration. He was emperor, self-proclaimed god, failed actor, and part-time executioner. Caligula didn't rule Rome, he tortured it like a jilted lover punishing a marble mistress. And one fine day in 39 AD, he decided it was time to reorganize the imperial family. Agrippina, his own sister, was accused of conspiracy, alongside her sister Livilla. She was swiftly shipped off to Pontia, a rocky island retreat designed for royals who'd lost political favour. One-way ticket, no room service. In the Roman Game of Thrones, having noble blood often meant you should start drafting your will before teething. Agrippina, however, didn't die. She waited and plotted. 2-year-old Nero, her only child, was left behind, like misplaced baggage after a political storm. No one asked if he wanted to stay with his father. No one cared. His father, Gnaeus Domitius, was already dying of dropsy. By January 41 AD, he was dead. Suddenly, Nero was orphaned in every way that mattered. No mother, no father, no future. He was handed off to his aunt, Domitia Lepida, mother of the future empress Messalina. Domitia loved him, sure, but love did little to counterbalance the reality that Caligula had wiped their family fortune clean. Nero, heir to the empire, was growing up like a beggar with a bloodline. While young Nero was adjusting to his downsized royal life, yes, there were still slaves, just no feasts. Rome once again rolled the dice. On January 24th, Caligula was assassinated in his own palace corridor by his supposedly loyal guards. No writer would dare script such a plotline and expect a paycheck, but it happened. Claudius, the limping, stammering, half-forgotten uncle, was found hiding behind a curtain. The guards, probably confused, declared him emperor. Rome now had a new ruler and a new direction. Claudius began undoing the madness. First step, bring back the exiled sisters. Agrippina and Livilla returned to Rome. Was it mercy, politics, or just preventative ghost management? No one asked, and Agrippina answered none. She didn't crawl back. She walked in like she'd only been out shopping. She returned with one goal, secure power through her son. Domitia Lepida had no choice. She handed Nero back. Agrippina didn't shed a tear. She activated her plan. Step 1, education. Not lullabies and bedtime stories, but a curriculum in control, rhetoric, and manipulation. She hired hand-picked tutors, appointed Beryllus and Anicetus, two freedmen, as supervisors. Nero wasn't being raised, he was being engineered. But Agrippina didn't stop there. She thought ahead, far ahead. By late 41, she was already evaluating potential husbands, not for Nero, for herself. Her first target, General Galba, noble, powerful, and unfortunately, not interested. Rejection didn't stall her, it redirected her. Next candidate, Passienus Crispus, wealthy, influential, married to Agrippina's cousin, Domitia the Elder. Minor inconvenience, soon after. Domitia the Elder died. No one asked questions, no autopsy, just a fresh wedding invitation. Agrippina married Crispus. Love wasn't part of the arrangement. Power was the dowry. Crispus stayed alive for a few years, and an admirable feat. Really, but in 47 AD, he too passed peacefully. His fortune, naturally, went to Agrippina. Rome raised an eyebrow. Agrippina raised her wine goblet. Nero, now 10, had a mother with gold, political capital, and a vendetta shaped like a crown. And himself? He was learning to smile at enemies, to write poetry sharp enough to stab, to breathe in a city where betrayal came with silk gloves or poisoned wine. Because in Rome, even a child needed a plan. Power in Rome was like perfume, intoxicating, expensive, and often lethal in large doses. Nobody knew this better than Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, who mistakenly believed that sleeping with half the Senate wouldn't lead to consequences. It did. By 48 AD, Messalina had crossed a line even Rome couldn't ignore. She not only took a lover, Gaius Silius, but reportedly married him while Claudius was still breathing. Bold move. Suicidal. Really, rumours spread faster than plague, and Rome, always thirsty for a scandal, drank deeply. Claudius, initially clueless, was finally alerted by his freedmen, the ancient equivalent of political advisors and gossip columnists. They convinced him this wasn't just adultery, it was treason. Coup d'etat with candles and satin sheets. Messalina was executed. Not quietly. Rome needed the drama. It was a public purge wrapped in personal betrayal. One empress down. Enter Agrippina the Younger. With Messalina gone, a power vacuum howled at the palace gates, and Agrippina, ever the strategist, filled it like poison fills a chalice. She wasn't just any widow. She was niece to the emperor, daughter of Germanicus, and mother to a boy she was grooming for the purple. Rome had its taboos. Marrying your uncle was certainly one of them. But Rome also had a senate, and a senate that could be persuaded. With help from the ever-pliable Vitellius, a longtime ally of Claudius, the matter was brought before the senators. Incest, he argued, was simply a matter of perspective, and Agrippina, he assured them, came with noble intentions and a dowry. The Senate gave in. Morality bowed to politics. Claudius agreed. Crowds cheered. And in early January 49 AD, Agrippina and Claudius were married in what must have been the most awkward wedding toast in Roman history. But Agrippina wasn't done. She had plans for her son Nero. Step 1, eliminate competition specifically. Claudius's biological son, Britannicus. The boy was younger than Nero but had one major flaw. He stood in Agrippina's way. Before wedding bells had finished ringing, Agrippina dissolved the engagement between Claudius's daughter Octavia and Lucius Silanus. Why? So she could pair Octavia with Nero instead. It was match-fixing with a marriage license. Nero, meanwhile, was only 12. But in Rome, childhood ended when politics began. In 50 AD, Claudius formally adopted Nero. The boy went from Lucius Domitius to Nero, Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. Quite the rebranding. New name, new status, new enemies. To seal the transformation, Nero donned the toga virilis, the Roman badge of manhood, a year later, at 13. It wasn't just a wardrobe change. It was a public declaration. This boy is not just a boy, Claudius rewarded his new son with future titles. Nero was named consul designate for 56 AD. He was granted proconsular imperium, a fancy way of saying command outside Rome. And he was declared princeps juventutis, or first among the young, basically, a preteen MVP award. Agrippina wasn't satisfied with honours. She wanted control. Britannicus, who once had his own loyal circle of advisers, saw them vanish one by one. Some were reassigned, others disappeared entirely. The boy himself was sidelined, silenced, and slowly erased from relevance. Agrippina also had a hand in reconfiguring the Praetorian Guard. She helped reduce it to a single command, given to Afranius Barus, a man loyal to her and now to Nero. At 14, Nero delivered his first speech in the Senate. Written, of course, by Seneca, the philosopher recently recalled from exile by Agrippina. It was eloquent. It was well received. It was not Nero's words. But optics mattered. The boy looked ready. By 52 AD, Claudius fell ill. Nero stood in the Senate again, making public vows for his recovery and promising celebratory games if the emperor survived. Sweet gesture, or insurance. A year later, Nero advocated for cities across the empire. Floods, fires, earthquakes. He made cases for aid, relief, and restoration in Greek, because Latin wasn't enough for a prodigy with ambition. Claudius was pleased. So was the public. Agrippina, watching from behind the curtain, knew what came next. In 53 AD, Nero married Claudia Octavia, but to avoid a legal scandal, since they were now technically siblings, the girl had to be adopted into another family first. Rome had rules. You just needed lawyers creative enough to bend them. After the formalities, the wedding took place. And with it, Nero officially entered the inner sanctum of imperial power. He was no longer just a prince. He was heir apparent. Agrippina's strategy had worked. Every move, every alliance, every convenient death had paid off. But the empire was a cruel chessboard, and no queen lasts long beside a king who thinks he's a god. If Rome had a family game night, the theme was always betrayal. No dice, just daggers. By 54 AD, Nero was rising like a particularly smug sun. The people adored him. He was young, handsome, poetic, a public relations dream sculpted in marble. He waved. He recited speeches. He smiled like someone who knew he'd already won the game. Britannicus, Claudius' biological son, was less radiant. Just a boy, and in Agrippina's eyes a problem. Potentially deadly one. The kind of threat you didn't confront directly, you isolated, smothered, and eventually erased. Agrippina, now empress and first matriarch of micromanagement, made sure Britannicus's mentors were removed. One by one, those loyal to him were exiled, reassigned, or found themselves under quiet investigation in Rome. Loyalty could be a terminal condition. Behind the scenes, Nero was being polished for power like a ceremonial sword. In public, he was the charming young prince. In private, his mother whispered strategy into his ear like a political lullaby. But emperors don't like to share lullabies, especially with their mothers. Claudius, the current and increasingly irrelevant emperor, had grown old, suspicious, and inconvenient. Some say he started favouring Britannicus again. Others say he simply started noticing that the empire was being run by his niece wife and her teenage son. That was a mistake. In October 54 AD, Claudius ate a plate of mushrooms. Shortly after, he died. Quickly, quietly, suspiciously. Poison? Likely. Agrippina? Possibly. Mushroom allergy? Convenient fiction. Officially, it was a tragic illness. Unofficially, it was Agrippina's grand finale, the final act of a very long play. With Claudius gone, the path was clear. Nero, just 16, became emperor. The transition was swift. The Praetorian Guard, prepped by Burrus, hailed him, Seneca handed him a speech. Nero read it with practiced grace. The Senate gave him power, and he pretended to hesitate before accepting it. A performance worthy of applause. Agrippina stood nearby, not on stage, but close enough to hear the cheers. Rome didn't mourn long. A lavish funeral was held for Claudius. Nero delivered a eulogy, another Seneca original. Then, in a stunning display of Roman hypocrisy, the Senate deified Claudius. The same man many had mocked in whispers was now officially a god. Nero, now son of a god, accepted this with a perfectly solemn expression. But even gods need to stay popular. Nero gave the people games, coin, and promises. He opened the palace to the public. He banned secret political trials. He praised the Senate and the army. He smiled and made everyone believe they mattered. Behind the curtains, Agrippina ruled. She had her own guards, her own advisors, her own listening room installed so she could monitor Senate meetings from the comfort of home. For a while, the arrangement worked. Nero had the spotlight. Agrippina had the strings. But teenage emperors rarely appreciate being puppets. Tension grew. Nero started distancing himself. Agrippina responded by shifting her gaze to Britannicus. She hinted that the real heir was being ignored, that perhaps Nero needed a reminder of his precarious position. This, as you might imagine, didn't go over well. In 55 AD, during a family dinner, Britannicus drank from a cup. Minutes later, he began convulsing. He collapsed. Nero calmly announced that his brother was having an epileptic episode. Nothing to worry about. He was carried out. He died that night, quietly, unceremoniously. Agrippina was shocked, or pretended to be. The truth is murky. What we do know, the poison was allegedly supplied by a woman named Locusta, Rome's favourite freelance toxin expert. She'd been used before. She would be used again. Britannicus was cremated the next day. No funeral games, no mourning period, just a brief notice and a lot of nervous glances. Nero, now free of rivals, turned to his own pleasures. He began an affair with Claudia Acte, a former slave. Agrippina, naturally, objected. She had other plans for his romantic resume, specifically staying married to Octavia and staying respectable. Nero didn't care. He moved Acte into the palace. Agrippina fumed. She scolded. She threatened. So Nero dismissed Pallas, one of Agrippina's oldest allies. The message was clear. His mother no longer called the shots. Agrippina fought back. She rallied support from the lower ranks of the Praetorian Guard. She whispered. She conspired. She reminded everyone she'd made Nero emperor and could unmake him. Nero responded with reform, specifically guard reform. Her guards were reassigned, her visitors were restricted, her influence began to evaporate. She was banished from the palace, not as a traitor, as a disruption. She moved to another villa, alone, but Agrippina wasn't done. She still had allies. Nero still had enemies, and Rome still had space for one more shocking twist. But next time, it wouldn't be at dinner. Rome had emperors who fought wars, built roads, passed laws. Nero, he wrote poetry. By 56 AD, it was clear the teenage emperor had no interest in being a traditional Roman leader. Military drills bored him. Senate meetings made him yawn. But give him a stage, a lyre, and a flattering spotlight, and suddenly the empire made sense. His mother, Agrippina, disagreed fiercely. She had orchestrated his rise, cut down his enemies, cleared the path, and now her son was throwing toga tantrums over theatre rehearsals and slave girls. It was not the legacy she envisioned. At the centre of their feud was Claudia Acte, a former slave with charm, wit, and more importantly, no noble blood whatsoever. Nero was obsessed. He didn't just sleep with her, he paraded her. gifted her jewellery, let her dine with senators. It was scandalous. Agrippina was livid. She insulted Acta publicly, called her unworthy, called Nero disgraceful. Then she reminded him, loudly, that his legitimacy came from her marriage to Claudius and his link to the Julian line, not from random affairs with commoners. Nero responded the way teenage emperors do. He grew a beard and declared emotional independence. Seneca, his tutor, sensed the danger. So did Burrus. Together, they tried to redirect Nero's energy, encouraged him to write, perform, play music. Better to have him strumming a lyre than strangling a senator. Agrippina didn't care. She saw her influence slipping. She tried a new tactic, championing Britannicus from beyond the grave. She implied that Rome had lost its rightful heir, that Nero's reign was tainted. It was a risky move. And Nero retaliated. Pallas, her longtime ally, the man who had helped arrange Nero's adoption, was fired. No explanation, just dismissed. A quiet purge wrapped in silk. Then Nero rebranded. He began referencing his biological father, Gnaeus Domitius, in public speeches, erected a statue, celebrated his birthday with games and ceremonies. It was a subtle message. I am not Claudius's son. I am my own legacy. Agrippina's face disappeared from coinage. Her name, once on every official document, faded from imperial correspondence. The palace staff no longer bowed when she entered. The Senate stopped seeking her approval. The isolation was total. Meanwhile, Nero leaned further into the arts. He practiced the cithara, a stringed instrument no self-respecting Roman general would touch. He recited his own poetry, often long and incomprehensible. He held private performances for the court. Attendees clapped, some genuinely, others for their lives. At night, Nero prowled the streets in disguise, not for security, for fun. He'd drink, carouse, pick fights. Sometimes he attacked people, other times he got attacked. Once, he struck a senator during one of his escapades. The senator apologized profusely. Then, days later, committed suicide from shame. Rome took note. Another man, Faustus Sulla, was accused of plotting an ambush. No trial, just exile. Nero's games weren't harmless anymore. By day, he played artist. By night, he played God. In the Senate, a new proposal was discussed. Should freedmen who insulted their former masters be re-enslaved? The nobles loved it. Nero, perhaps sensing the hypocrisy, intervened. He wrote a letter, said that freedmen served vital roles in society, that each case should be judged individually, that blanket punishment was unjust. The Senate, surprisingly, agreed. It was one of Nero's rare rational moments. That same year, he held his second consulship. He ordered the construction of a new amphitheatre, massive, ornate, and absurdly expensive. The foundations were stone. The seats were marble. The awnings, dyed sky blue with tiny stars embroidered. It was the world's most luxurious vanity project. To sweeten public opinion, he handed out 400 sesterces to every citizen in Rome. It worked. For a while, the people cheered, bread and circuses, now with extra glitter. Agrippina watched all this from a villa far from the centre. Powerless, isolated, forgotten. Her son was no longer the boy she groomed. He was emperor, performer, poet, executioner, and Rome had no idea what came next. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in Nero's kitchen, it was flambéed and possibly served with a side of shipwreck. By 59 AD, Nero had had enough of his mother. Agrippina, once the architect of his reign, had become a liability. She scowled in public, whispered in private. Worse, she still expected to be obeyed. Nero didn't like that. He wanted Poppaea Sabina, a noble woman, Gorgeous, ambitious, already married, Agrippina hated her. Not because of morality, that ship had sailed long ago, but because Poppaea threatened her grip on Nero's heart and mind. The emperor, feeling increasingly cornered, did what all Roman sons eventually seem to do when family gets in the way. He plotted matricide. Of course, you couldn't just stab your mother in the forum. Rome frowned on that, even for emperors, so Nero needed subtlety and help. Enter Anicetus, a freedman, trusted naval officer, lifelong Agrippina hater, perfect accomplice. Plan A was poetic, a mechanism hidden in Agrippina's ceiling, set to collapse while she slept. Death by decorative engineering. But word leaked. Agrippina didn't sleep much after that. So, on to Plan B, a collapsible boat. Yes, you read that correctly. Nero invited Agrippina to a festival in Baiae, pretended reconciliation, smiled, hugged, even walked her to the shore. There, a finely appointed pleasure vessel awaited. Agrippina boarded, relaxed under a decorative canopy, and sailed off into the night. Then the ceiling caved in, but Agrippina wasn't beneath it. A maid was crushed instead. Agrippina and her companion, Acerronia, fell into the water. Acerronia screamed, claiming to be the empress. A fatal mistake. She was clubbed to death by sailors. Agrippina, injured but alive, swam to shore and survived. She sent a message to Nero. She was safe and grateful for his hospitality. Nero panicked. He hadn't planned for failure. His entire imperial dignity rested on his mother staying very, very dead. So he sent men to her villa. They found Agrippina lying in bed, wounded but calm. She greeted them with imperial poise. Then, when the lead assassin approached, she bared her stomach and declared, "Strike here the womb that bore him." They obliged. Agrippina died at age 43. No funeral, no honour. Her body was burned and buried in an unmarked grave. The woman who birthed emperors was now dust. Quiet. Finally, or so Nero hoped. News of the accident was spun immediately. A shipwreck. Tragic. Heroic attempts to save her. All lies. Of course. Rome suspected as much, but no one dared say it out loud, except the graffiti artists, and they didn't last long. Nero, for his part, claimed self-defense. Agrippina, he insisted, had plotted to overthrow him, to install a new heir. Even worse, she'd insulted his wardrobe. The Senate, ever obliging, thanked the gods for his survival. They declared annual games in honor of Agrippina's foiled treason. Statues were offered, sacrifices made. All the usual hypocritical pageantry. Nero didn't return to Rome immediately. He stayed in Naples, composing music and contemplating guilt. Some said he was haunted. Others said he was just high on acclaim. When he did return, it was in style. Parades, applause, sacrifices to Mars the Avenger. He stood before the Capitol like a conquering hero, not a patricidal son, but something shifted. The restraint Agrippina had imposed was gone. So was her political council, with Seneca growing distant and Burrus aging fast. Nero turned to new advisors, men who flattered, indulged and enabled. He started performing in private recitals, built a theatre for his personal shows, hosted Juvenalia, games dedicated to his first shave. He wore gold-trimmed robes and praised his own singing voice. And somewhere in the empire, statues of Agrippina quietly crumbled. Rome didn't weep, it watched. The empress was dead. Long live the artist. There comes a moment in every empire when its leader decides to star in his own tragedy. For Rome, that moment arrived with Nero, emperor by day, diver by night. After Agrippina's death, Nero felt lighter, freer, more theatrical. The woman who once pulled his strings was gone. The stage was his. Literally, he began performing, at first, in private, small audiences, friendly applause, but soon he wanted more. He wasn't content with courtiers clapping. He craved thunderous ovations from the masses, so he built a theatre, and not just any theatre, one equipped with rotating stages, scent fountains, and seating so plush even senators forgot their dignity. Nero, in flowing robes and gilded sandals, took the stage not as emperor but as artist. He sang, he acted, he played instruments, he cried on cue. The audience, terrified, because in Rome bad reviews could be fatal, senators sat in forced admiration. Soldiers guarded the exits not to protect Nero, but to prevent early departures. People faked fainting. Some literally died in their seats rather than risk walking out. But Nero was undeterred. He believed he was divine, not because he ruled Rome, because he could hold a note in D minor, and he wanted validation. He enrolled in musical competitions in Greece, not as emperor, as contestant. He insisted on being judged. Of course, no judge dared vote against him. His travel entourage included hundreds of musicians, flatterers, and bribes. At one point, he competed in every event and won them all, even the ones he didn't enter. Meanwhile, Rome trembled. With Agrippina gone, a new void opened in government. Seneca tried to advise. Burrus still led the Praetorian Guard, but Nero increasingly ignored them both. He preferred his inner circle of yes-men, artists, aesthetes, astrologers. Realists need not apply. Octavia, his wife, became irrelevant. Nero rarely saw her. He was obsessed with Poppaea Sabina, clever, ambitious, and encouraging of his artistic delusions. She told him he was brilliant, beautiful, misunderstood. He married her in his mind before ever divorcing Octavia. The people, at first, indulged him. Bread still came, games still played. If the emperor wanted to strum a harp while Rome simmered, so be it. But unease grew, taxes rose, trials increased, executions resumed. Anyone who mocked Nero's performances, even in private, vanished. A poet was killed for including a line that vaguely resembled an insult. Another man was accused of insufficient clapping. The message was clear. Rome would applaud or bleed. Even in the Senate, fear spread. Senators praised Nero's voice with trembling sincerity. Some compared him to Apollo. Others wrote sonnets about his fingers. One man publicly fainted from overwhelm. It became a ritual. Nero performed, the city survived, and no one dared laugh unless he did. At gladiator games, Nero sometimes appeared in costume, dressed as heroes, gods, occasionally as a pregnant woman. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or cry, so they did both. One winter, he decided to perform an epic in full, all 12 hours of it, no intermission. People died from exhaustion, others faked death to escape. Nero called it his greatest triumph. Behind the curtains, Rome began to rot. Grain prices rose, corruption surged. Provinces complained of misrule, but Nero barely noticed. His mind was in verse, not policy. His fingers itched for instruments, not decrees. He saw himself as misunderstood, a visionary, a genius born in the wrong century. But history wasn't misreading him. It was watching, waiting, because when an empire becomes an audience, and the emperor becomes the act, the next scene usually involves fire. Rome burned for 9 days, but Nero only needed one to become a legend. It started on the night of July 18th, 64 AD, in the merchant district near the Circus Maximus. A spark, a breeze, a city built from tinder. The flames spread like gossip at a Senate banquet. Fast, vicious, and everywhere at once. Wooden tenements collapsed, temples cracked, statues melted. Families fled with what they could carry, which wasn't much. Others didn't make it out at all. The heat turned stone to ash and citizens to shadows. Rome, the eternal city, was now an inferno. And where was Nero? Not in the city. He was relaxing at his villa in Antium, far from the smoke and screaming, but according to whispers, and soon, entire verses of rumour, when news reached him. Nero didn't panic. He performed. Some said he watched the flames from a private balcony while playing the lyre. Others claimed he sang the Sack of Troy. Comparing Rome's misery to mythical drama, the tune? No one knows. The optics? Catastrophic. When Nero finally returned, the damage was apocalyptic. 10 of Rome's 14 districts were destroyed. The rest, blackened and broken. And the people? They were furious. Theories sparked before the embers cooled that Nero started the fire himself, that he wanted to clear land for a new palace, that he'd paid arsonists, that his art needed new stage, and Rome was the set. He denied everything. He acted devastated, declared emergency aid, opened his gardens to the homeless, cut grain prices, imported food from other provinces, staged relief efforts like a man auditioning for sainthood. Then he announced the construction of the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It wasn't subtle, sprawling, opulent, and impossibly gaudy. The new palace included fountains, forests, a massive lake, and a rotating dining room, marble halls, gilded ceilings, a 120-foot-tall statue of himself as the sun god. The message? Rome had burned. Nero had risen. Naturally, the backlash was swift. The Senate grumbled. Citizens rioted. His approval ratings dropped faster than a collapsed aqueduct. Nero needed a distraction, a scapegoat, something to throw to the lions, metaphorically, then literally. Enter the Christians, a small, strange sect, secretive, suspicious, unpopular, believers in a single god, which already sounded treasonous in polytheistic Rome, easy to hate, easier to blame. Nero accused them of arson. Then he made a spectacle of punishment. Christians were arrested, tortured, crucified, burned alive as human torches in Nero's gardens. Others were thrown to wild beasts during public festivals. The crowds watched, half horrified, half entertained. Nero called it justice. Historians called it the first imperial persecution of Christians. Some called it genius. Most called it madness. Tacitus, the great Roman historian, recorded that while people disliked the Christians, they hated Nero's cruelty even more. Sympathy shifted, not to the emperor, to his victims. Meanwhile, Nero toured the ruins of Rome with theatrical flair. He composed poems about rebirth, declared that the city would rise again, grander than before. Statues would be taller, streets straighter, buildings fireproofed with marble. Naturally, he oversaw new city plans, hired architects, ordered buildings spaced farther apart, mandated the use of non-flammable materials. On paper, it sounded noble, but nobody forgot who may have lit the match. And Nero, for all his posturing, couldn't erase the smell of smoke clinging to his reputation. Rome would rebuild, but the trust, that was gone. The emperor hadn't just lost buildings, he'd lost the city's soul. Poppaea Sabina was everything Nero desired. Elegant, ambitious, beautiful. Most importantly, not Octavia, by 62 AD. The emperor had grown tired of his wife. Octavia was the daughter of Claudius. Noble, dutiful, disastrously dull. She rarely spoke, never smiled. And perhaps most offensive to Nero, refused to worship his music. Poppaea, in contrast, adored his voice, or pretended to. She praised his performances, laughed at his jokes, whispered sweet nothings about divine talent. Nero melted, but there was a problem. He was still married, and Rome loved Octavia. She was the last tether to the Claudian line. a symbol of the old dynasty. Her popularity, especially among the common people, irritated Poppaea. And Nero hated being irritated, so he plotted a separation. He first accused Octavia of infertility. That failed. The public didn't care if she bore children, they just didn't want Poppaea. Next, he tried adultery. A flute player named Euchaerus was dragged into court, accused of sleeping with the empress, beaten, tortured, forced to confess. It was the most melodramatic courtroom theatre in Roman history. Everyone saw through it. Everyone except Nero. He exiled Octavia anyway. The backlash was instant. Crowds rioted in the streets. Statues of Poppaea were torn down. Effigies of Octavia were carried in procession. Draped in flowers, citizens wept, senators grumbled. Rome had chosen its queen, and it wasn't the one in the palace. Nero panicked. For a moment, it looked like Octavia would be recalled. But Poppaea intervened. Calmly, quietly, fatally. A new charge was brought. That Octavia was plotting against the emperor. That her maid had found poison. Or maybe it was just perfume. The lines blurred. Regardless, she was sentenced to death. On the island where she'd been exiled, soldiers arrived. They tied her wrists, bled her wrists. When she didn't die fast enough, they suffocated her. A quiet, lonely end for the last daughter of Claudius. She was 22. Nero said nothing, Rome said too much, but no one dared act. With Octavia gone, Poppaea became empress. She was crowned, draped in pearls, and given a golden chariot. She ruled the palace like a seasoned general, charming, cruel, calculating. She gave Nero a daughter. He wept with joy, declared himself blessed. Then the child died, and something cracked. Poppaea became pregnant again. This time, Nero hovered, obsessed. He watched her, fed her, smothered her with attention and paranoia. He feared betrayal, feared bad omens, feared being forgotten. One evening they argued. About what? No one knows. A comment, a look, a refusal. What we do know, Nero kicked her. Hard. Poppaea, pregnant and unprotected, collapsed. She died within hours. Nero claimed it was an accident. He wept publicly, declared days of mourning, commissioned statues, built a temple, ordered her embalmed and buried with imperial honours. Rome, numb from grief and confusion, watched silently. He didn't remarry, not yet, but his mourning was short. Within weeks, Nero was back on stage, back in costume, back to being the centre of his own tragic opera. Only now, the tragedies weren't fiction. They were history. Every emperor believes he's special. Nero believed he was divine. Not metaphorically and not poetically, literally. By 64 AD, he wasn't just a man on a throne. He was the sun, the muse, the eternal flame. His name was etched on temples, his face moulded into coins like a deity mid-serenade. People didn't address him as Caesar. They called him Divine Nero, sometimes, Lord of the world, and he liked it. He didn't just want power, he wanted worship. Statues of gods were remodelled to resemble him. Shrines to Apollo suddenly featured a suspiciously familiar chin. In Greece, he performed in sacred festivals, not as a guest, but as a sacred competitor. He entered every event, won them all, obviously. Judges applauded, or else. He insisted on being called the new sun, compared himself to Helios. Once, he declared that the world only turned because he existed. No one disagreed. They valued their lives. Rome adjusted. Priests held ceremonies in his honour. Offerings were made. One ambitious governor erected a temple titled Neronian Salvation. Citizens who used to pray to Jupiter now sent up petitions to the imperial ego. But while Nero soared skyward, Rome plummeted. The empire groaned. Provinces complained. Revolts flared. Taxes strangled. Grain shipments stalled. But Nero, he was busy composing an epic poem about himself conquering the stars. The Senate, toothless and terrified, passed decrees in his honour. May the breath of Nero heal the empire. May his voice purify the air. One decree proposed naming every month after him, another every week. He declined, but only because he hadn't decided which month was most musical. Meanwhile, he expanded the Domus Aurea, his sprawling palace complex temple hybrid. It wasn't just a residence, it was a monument to madness. Marble halls stretched like prophecy, ceilings painted with gods in his image, dining rooms with rotating skylights and scented breezes, and in the centre, a colossal statue of himself 120 feet tall, as Saul Invictus, the unconquered sun. Visitors were speechless, which was fortunate, because Nero wasn't interested in conversation, just praise. He began wearing divine regalia, gold tunics, laurel crowns, sandals engraved with celestial symbols. He refused to travel without incense bearers. His entourage chanted hymns, senators were required to bow. Some pretended to faint, others actually did. He commissioned poets to immortalize his dreams. One verse claimed his birth ended winter, another that his voice could calm storms. Nero approved both, and yet he felt insecure. He feared plots, whispers, shadows. Anyone not clapping loud enough was dangerous. Artists who criticized his work disappeared. Senators who hesitated before standing were executed. His paranoia was now policy. He built a temple to himself on the Palatine. Funded by public money, worship was mandatory. Sacrifices required. He even had his own priests, dressed in robes stitched with sheet music. Rome no longer had an emperor. It had a god, or at least a man determined to become one. But gods, even the invented ones, have expiration dates, and Nero's halo was starting to slip. Even gods can be assassinated, especially when they sing off-key. By 65 AD, Nero's empire had become a theatre of fear. The Senate bowed, the citizens whispered, and the emperor played both actor and executioner. His enemies weren't defeated in battle, they were erased mid-performance. But beneath the applause, a plot simmered. Enter Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a senator, charismatic, wealthy, popular. He threw lavish parties, quoted Virgil, and more importantly, didn't think Nero was divine. Piso believed Rome deserved better, someone with reason, leadership, less poetry. Others agreed. Disillusioned generals, betrayed courtiers, bankrupted nobles, even artists. A full cast of the disgruntled gathered behind closed doors, plotting regime change with wine and whispered oaths. Their plan was simple-ish. Nero would attend a theatre performance. Piso's assassin would strike. The crowd, loyal to Piso, would cheer. The Praetorian Guard, already bribed, would switch allegiance. Piso would ascend. The Senate would declare it destiny. Rome would exhale. What could go wrong? Everything. One conspirator, a senator named Milicus, cracked, or got greedy, or both. He betrayed the plot to Nero's secretary. Within hours, the palace turned into an inquisition chamber. Nero, upon hearing the news, did not panic. He performed a poem, then called for torture. The arrests came fast. Names spilled. Tortured men confessed. Some out of guilt, others out of agony, a few because it was safer than silence. Piso was arrested. He didn't resist. He slit his wrists in his garden while sipping wine. Final toast to a better Rome. Nero, unsatisfied, wanted a spectacle. The philosopher Seneca, once his tutor, was implicated. Not directly, but close enough. Nero didn't forget that Seneca once urged moderation. That was reason enough. Seneca was ordered to kill himself. He obeyed, calmly, dressed in white, surrounded by family. He opened his veins and gave a final lecture, bleeding wisdom and irony at once. Lucan, the poet, followed, nephew to Seneca, once famous for his epic Pharsalia, now famous for dying with defiant lines on his lips. He recited his own verses as blood drained from his body. Even Tigellinus, Nero's loyal enforcer, trembled. No one was safe. Women were implicated. Servants, slaves, children. One young boy was beaten until he confessed to plotting Nero's downfall using coded bird calls. His testimony led to 3 more arrests. Rome wept. Quietly. The purges spread. Statues of Piso were smashed, his name erased, friends vanished, supporters executed or exiled. The Praetorian Guard, once suspect, now marched double shifts. Nero declared victory. He built new altars, held a public thanksgiving, sacrificed 300 animals in the Forum. The people cheered, or pretended to. It was safer that way. And still, Nero felt unsafe. He increased his bodyguard, slept in different rooms, installed mirrors to catch assassins. Paranoia wasn't a condition anymore. It was protocol. The Pisonian conspiracy hadn't ended Nero's rule, but it ended his mask. The smiling artist was gone. The tyrant remained in Nero's Rome. Death came with a time slot. Appointments were made. Couriers dispatched, victims informed. It wasn't murder, it was scheduling. By 66 AD, Nero had perfected the art of the polite execution. He didn't always shout, he didn't always threaten. Often, he simply sent a note. The Emperor requests you end your life. Conveniently, today, and most complied, because refusal wasn't just disrespectful, it was messy. For you, for your family, for your slaves. Rome had developed a morbid etiquette around suicide. One Nero refined into ritual. Take Petronius, courtier, poet, arbiter of elegance. He once advised Nero on everything from fashion to furniture. Brilliant, witty, sharp, too sharp. He was accused, falsely, of involvement in the Pisonian conspiracy. No trial, just an imperial suggestion. Petronius didn't protest. He invited friends, set a banquet, had his veins opened slowly, then bandaged, then opened again. He sipped wine, read poetry, and dictated his will. Not a legal document, a literary eulogy mocking Nero's vulgarity. Then he died. Gracefully. Lucan's end was bloodier. The poet had tried to redeem himself, to confess, to blame others. It didn't work. Nero hated talent that resisted control. Lucan opened his veins and, as legend claims, recited verses while dying. Poetry as bloodletting, a very Roman ending. The philosopher Musonius Rufus, banished. The playwright Pacuvius, dead. The senator Lateranus, beheaded in public. He had dared to joke about Nero's lyre solos. No one laughed. And so, fear settled in. The elite stopped hosting dinners. Poets burned manuscripts. Senators complimented Nero's hair with trembling sincerity. Every compliment was rehearsed, every nod calculated. The safest position in Rome, somewhere silent, invisible, forgettable. Families wrote wills weekly. Slaves memorized escape routes. Priests prayed to any god still listening. Even death grew competitive. Who could die with the most style, the most irony, the most applause? One man composed his epitaph while bleeding. Another requested his funeral begin before he stopped breathing. A woman, ordered to die, asked for a final dance. She performed barefoot, then drank poison. The audience clapped. Nero was not amused, and yet the executions continued. Some were personal, others symbolic. Most were completely arbitrary. Nero's paranoia had eclipsed reason. Anyone with a name, a voice, or a past was suspect. He began executing former allies, even minor critics, an actor who refused to change a line, a servant who delivered sour wine, a general who coughed too loudly during Nero's rehearsal. Rome wasn't just afraid, it was exhausted. Every street echoed with silence. Every senator walked with rehearsed grief. Every artist burned with unexpressed brilliance, and the certainty that survival required self-erasure. Nero, meanwhile, composed odes. He declared himself the pinnacle of Roman culture. He commissioned statues, songs, festivals in his name. He announced a new contest, the Neronian Games, where everyone could compete. But no one could win unless he allowed it, because in Nero's Rome, life was performance, and death, a curtain call. Rome had seen strange weddings before, political unions, scandalous affairs, arranged dynastic contracts. But this was new, somewhere between delusion and depravity. Nero married a boy. His name was Sporus, a teenager, soft-spoken, slight, and, unfortunately, resembling Poppaea Sabina, Nero's late wife, just enough to hurt. Poppaea had died under Nero's foot, literally. He kicked her during a rage. She was pregnant. She bled. She died. He missed her, so he found a replacement. Sporus was castrated, not metaphorically, surgically, against his will, then dressed in silks, perfumed, paraded, given Poppaea's jewellery, her hairstyle, her role. Then came the wedding. It wasn't secret. Nero staged a full ceremony. Guests, musicians, vows. He wore a bridegroom's tunic. Sporus wore a veil. Priests officiated. Vows were exchanged. Rome held its breath and pretended it was normal. The celebration lasted days, banquets, games, wine-soaked toasts to the happy couple. Senators attended. They bowed. They clapped. They smiled through gritted teeth. Unsure whether they were guests or hostages. Some laughed quietly, then publicly regretted it. Others wept. For the empire, for the future, for the boy who now answered to Empress. Sporus was taken to the palace, given attendants, escorts, a staff. He dined with Nero nightly, slept beside him, was introduced as Lady Sabina in imperial processions. No one dared object. Historians still debate Sporus's role. Victim, lover, symbol, all three? What's clear? He was a mirror, reflecting Nero's grief, madness, and theatrical hunger. Nero didn't want love, he wanted illusion. He didn't seek comfort, he sought reenactment. Sporus wasn't a person anymore. He was a role. The public, confused and horrified, murmured in alleys. They joked, but not too loudly. Whispers of Queen Sporus made their way into bathhouses, then prisons. People vanished over punchlines. Nero, oblivious or uncaring, continued the act. He took Sporus to Greece during his artistic tour, introduced him to foreign dignitaries, flaunted him in chariots, declared him divine. When questioned, he defended the marriage as a tribute to eternal love. Rome just blinked. Seneca was dead. Burrus too. No one remained who could challenge him. The Senate was a gallery of statues. The army, silenced with gold. The people, exhausted. So the farce continued. At one banquet, Nero had Sporus sit on a golden throne beside him, while actors reenacted Poppaea's funeral. At another, he made him recite verses Nero had written, praising Nero's divine embrace. No one laughed anymore. This wasn't decadence. This was dissent. The empire, once ruled by logic and steel, now groaned beneath wigs and wine. Nero's reality no longer aligned with Rome's. He didn't see decline. He saw performance. And in that performance, Sporus was his masterpiece. He called him his eternal companion, his bride, his ghost of Poppaea, his second chance. But even illusions fade, even roles expire. And when they do, the curtain falls, Nero always believed Rome didn't appreciate him, so he packed his costumes and sailed to Greece, where art mattered. Applause was mandatory, and winning was just a bribe away. He called it a cultural pilgrimage. Rome called it a relief. It began in Corinth, or Delphi, or maybe Olympia. No one remembers, because Nero didn't arrive as a tourist. He arrived as a conqueror of acoustics. Greece, flattered and frightened, welcomed him with open arms and sealed lips. Temples were polished, roads cleared, musicians rehearsed day and night. Judges were reminded who paid their salaries. Nero entered every contest: singing, lyre, acting, poetry, chariot racing, discussion of chariot racing. If the event had applause, he was in. He won everything, even when he didn't finish. At the Olympic Games, he entered the chariot race with a team of 10 horses. Traditional teams used 4. Nero liked symmetry. During the race, he fell off twice. Didn't finish. The crowd gasped. He stood, bowed, declared it artistic dismount. He still won. The judges cited his divine enthusiasm. He thanked them personally, geared with gold. At poetry readings, Nero's recitations were long, dense, and drenched in self-pity. He compared himself to Orpheus, Apollo, the sun, sometimes all 3 in one sentence. Audiences clapped until their hands bled. One man sneezed mid-recital. He was flogged. At theatrical contests, Nero wept on cue. Or rather, he commanded the audience to weep. Guards watched for dry eyes. If you didn't sob, you didn't sleep at home. The tour lasted over a year. Nero visited every city-state worth a coin. He rebuilt temples, donated lavishly. He was adored not for his talent, but his wallets. Cities renamed streets after him. Statues appeared overnight. One town crowned him eternal Hellenic saviour of culture. He liked that. Rome, back home, simmered. The Senate waited. Governors stalled. The grain supply dwindled. Taxes rose. But Nero was in Athens, reenacting scenes from Orestes. He played every role. The chorus too. He didn't send laws, he sent lyrics. Finally, in 67 AD, he announced his return. He brought 1,800 trophy, all first place, all engraved with his name. They were displayed in Rome like military spoils. The Senate applauded, loudly, with trembling devotion. At his return festival, Nero declared he had conquered Greece with song. He entered the city wearing a laurel crown and theatrical robes. Standing in a golden chariot pulled by white horses, behind him marched actors, poets, mimes, judges, hundreds of Greeks, not citizens, hostages of flattery. Rome blinked. This wasn't triumph, it was theatre. And the audience was growing restless. Empires rarely crumble in silence. They begin with whispers, then laughter, then swords. In 68 AD, the first crack came from Gaul. His name was Gaius Julius Vindex. Roman senator, Gallic noble, provincial governor, and apparently tired of Nero's concerts. While Nero was rehearsing his latest tragic monologue in Naples, Vindex was assembling legions. He declared the emperor a disgrace, a tyrant, a fraud with a lyre. Then he raised the standard of revolt. Gaul listened. The rebellion wasn't massive, yet, but it was loud. Vindex called on the Senate to restore dignity. He wrote letters to governors. Some ignored him, others hesitated. A few nodded discreetly and checked their own ambitions. Rome was stunned. A provincial governor openly calling for the emperor's removal? It was unprecedented and wildly popular. Nero, he laughed. He called Vindex a bad actor with worse lines, ordered statues of himself erected in every theatre, declared a festival, composed a tragedy about betrayal. But this wasn't theatre anymore. Vindex made contact with Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Hispania, an old soldier, stoic, not flashy. exactly the kind of man Rome missed. Galba didn't answer immediately. He waited, calculated, then declared allegiance to the Senate and the Roman people. Not Nero. The message was clear. Back in Rome, the Senate sat paralyzed. Nero raged. He wrote speeches, threatened senators, declared Galba a public enemy, then, in a final act of delusion, promised he'd lead an army himself after he finished composing an ode. The Praetorian Guard began whispering. They hadn't been paid in months. The bonuses promised after Nero's Greek victories never arrived. Their loyalty, directly proportional to their coin purses. Then Vindex marched. He and Galba's combined forces threatened to unite. But before they could, Vindex clashed with the governor of Germania, Lucius Virginius Rufus. The battle was brutal. Vindex lost. He died by his own hand, or perhaps by one of his soldiers. History, like Nero's lyrics, is unclear. Nero celebrated, declared it divine justice, held more games, thank the gods, wrote a song titled Victory of the Divine Emperor. But he missed the bigger picture. The rebellion didn't end with Vindex. It started there. Galba wasn't dead. His troops declared him emperor. Provinces began defecting. Governors stopped answering Nero's messengers. Supply lines frayed. Grain shipments stalled. Then came the final blow. The Praetorian Guard switched sides. Led by their prefect Nymphidius Sabinus, they declared support for Galba, offered him the throne for a price. Nero was finished, but he didn't realize it yet. He rehearsed a speech to the Senate, practiced weeping, imagined a grand farewell concert, maybe even a tour. Surely the people still loved him. Rome did not. The Senate convened. They debated, whispered, then declared Nero a public enemy. His statues were torn down, his name scraped from monuments, even his songs banned. The emperor was alone, and for once, off stage. When gods fall, they don't land gracefully. They flail, they sob, they beg. Nero did all three. It was June, 68 AD. The Senate had declared him a public enemy. The Praetorian Guard defected. His friends vanished. Even Sporus stopped calling him divine. For the first time in his life, Nero was alone. He tried denial. He dressed in mourning robes and wandered the palace, muttering Shakespearean lines he hadn't written yet. He asked servants to applaud him. They didn't. Next came anger. He shouted at statues, slapped a lute, ordered death sentences for senators already dead. When news arrived that even the gladiators were abandoning him, he cried treason. Then came bargaining. He considered fleeing to Egypt. I could be a musician there, he said. They love art. No one laughed. He suggested going into exile, perhaps on a private island where he could host eternal festivals and teach philosophy. The Senate wasn't interested, so Nero packed. He wore a simple tunic, disguised himself with a cloak, left the palace at night with a handful of loyal servants, including his secretary, Epaphroditus, and, absurdly, Sporus, still dressed in bridal silk. They rode out to the villa of a freedman named Phaon. Nero hid in a cellar. No chandeliers, no perfume, just damp walls and the growing sound of galloping hooves. By morning, word arrived the Senate had sentenced him to death, in the ancient fashion. That meant strangulation. He panicked. "Have I neither friend nor foe to bring me a final blow?" he cried. "Is this how the world ends, in a ditch, like a dog?" He begged Epaphroditus to kill him. Epaphroditus refused. He paced, cursed, recited his own poetry badly, then paused. He heard footsteps. The soldiers were coming, at last. Trembling, he seized a dagger. He pressed it to his throat, but his hands shook. He hesitated. He screamed, "What an artist dies in me!" Then Epaphroditus, out of mercy or pity, drove the blade in. Nero gurgled, fell, bled, And Rome exhaled. He was 30 years old. When the soldiers arrived, they found the emperor dying on a flea-ridden mattress, dressed in rags, surrounded by silence. One centurion stepped forward and tried to stop the bleeding. "Too late," Nero muttered. "Too late. Is this your loyalty?" Then he died, the last of the Julio Claudians, a dynasty that ruled for a century, undone by ego and eyeliner. Rome didn't mourn. Citizens danced in the streets, senators unsealed wine. The people didn't just survive Nero, they survived his performances. His statues were melted, his poems burned, his memory condemned. Only Sporus wept. Rome had barely buried Nero before the throne turned into a game of musical corpses. It was 69 AD, the year of 4 emperors, 4 crowns, 4 corpses, one very confused empire. First came Galba, stoic, wrinkled, older than the Forum itself, when he marched on Rome with support from the Senate and the Praetorian Guard. People exhaled. Finally, a grown-up in charge. He entered the city with no fanfare, no music, no fireworks, just a frown and a scroll of austerity reforms. He cancelled Nero's bonuses, cut military stipends, declared moral rejuvenation. The army revolted in under a week. Galba, noble in theory, was suicidal in practice. He alienated everyone, soldiers, senators, slaves. He refused bribes, rejected flattery, executed friends, appointed a successor no one liked, Lucius Calpurnius Piso. Rome grumbled. The Praetorian Guard, suddenly short on coin, whispered. One man listened closely, Marcus Salvius Otho, a former governor, stylish, ambitious, once Poppaea's husband. Before Nero stole her, he bribed the guard, promised gold, parties, paychecks. On January 15th, Galba and Piso were hacked down in the Forum. Their heads were paraded on pikes. Enter Otho. He promised peace, stability, a return to order. Rome cheered. Then the legions in Germania declared for Vitellius, a general with a stomach larger than his army, lazy, gluttonous, and worshipped by soldiers who hated bureaucracy. He marched on Rome. Otho panicked, rushed into battle, lost, badly. Rather than flee or plead, he did something almost noble. He killed himself, quietly, with a blade and a note apologizing for civil war. Rome blinked. 2 emperors dead in 3 months. Vitellius entered like a parade float. He dined, he drank, he declared holidays. He made his horse a palace valet, not senator, just decor. Then he started killing. Anyone loyal to Galba or Otho, anyone with opinions, anyone who wore a purple tunic. His rule, like his diet, was excessive and unsustainable. Meanwhile, far from Rome, in the dusty east, a new name stirred. Titus Flavius Vespasianus. Vespasian, a general, gruff, practical, smelled like sweat and sarcasm. He was putting down a revolt in Judea when the news arrived. Rome was collapsing, again. His legions cheered, declared him emperor. So he marched. Rome, by now, was exhausted. Civil war fatigue set in, but the Flavian forces were determined. They clashed with Vitellius's troops at Cremona. Blood flowed like Nero's poetry, overly dramatic and everywhere. Vitellius lost. He tried to abdicate. The Senate offered him retirement. He refused. Then came his last supper. He was dragged through the streets, beaten, mocked. His body was thrown in the Tiber. 3 emperors gone. Vespasian entered Rome in December. Calm, unimpressed. He restored order, balanced accounts, rebuilt walls and trust, declared, "It's time to stop the bleeding." The people didn't cheer. They exhaled, and for the first time in years, Rome felt something unfamiliar, stability. Rome didn't need a god. It needed a plumber. Enter Vespasian. No golden robes, no lyre solos. No marble chariots pulled by unicorns. Just a gruff ex-general with calloused hands and the face of a retired gladiator who never smiled. After a year of emperors dropping like flies in a torch factory, stability looked like sandals caked with road dust and sarcasm that smelled like vinegar. Vespasian arrived in December 69 AD. He didn't promise miracles. He promised audits. The treasury was empty. Rome, once the jewel of the world, now rattled like a gambling addict's purse. Nero's debauchery, civil war, stage poetry competitions with prizes of gold statues. All had bled the coffers dry. Vespasian opened the books. He didn't flinch, he laughed. Then he taxed everything. Urinals, prostitutes, lawsuits, inheritances. If it moved, breathed, or looked expensive, it was taxed. One particularly pungent tax on public toilets sparked outrage. A senator asked, "Is there no dignity in Rome?" Vespasian held up a coin. "Money doesn't stink." The phrase stuck. He reined in the legions, standardized pay, purged disloyal officers, sent generals to real wars, not theatre competitions. Discipline returned like a slap to the face. He rebuilt what Nero burned. Temples, markets, forums, the capital, most importantly, the future. He started construction on a grand amphitheatre in the ruins of Nero's Domus Aurea, a gift to the people, entertainment that didn't include forced poetry readings, a monument to Roman endurance, not ego. It would later be called the Colosseum. But back then, it was just a brilliant piece of PR. The people didn't adore Vespasian. They trusted him. He didn't perform, he governed. His humour was dry. His speeches, shorter than Nero's wardrobe changes. Once, a poet offered him verses glorifying his rule. Vespasian offered silence in return. "Better no flattery," he said, "than bad poetry." He elevated competence over bloodlines, appointed equestrians to high office, promoted talent, demoted arrogance. The Senate, used to being ignored or terrorized, was pleasantly stunned. Rome began to breathe. Vespasian avoided scandal. Mostly, he did favour his sons, Titus and Domitian, but they were groomed for leadership, not paraded in drag. There were no boy brides, no divine statues, no rumours of marriage to the moon. He kept the imperial image simple. Old soldier, honest administrator, builder, father. When rumours swirled about plots, he didn't execute half the city. He investigated, quietly, then moved on. The result? Peace. Not glorious, not poetic, but peace. And for an empire reeling from madness. Peace was revolutionary, even in death. Vespasian was practical. On his deathbed, he joked, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god." Then he died, like everything else in his reign, with irony and dignity. Titus ruled for just over 2 years, but in that time, Rome burned, coughed and exploded. And somehow, he still became beloved. It began in 79 AD. Vespasian died. Titus, his son, inherited the throne. The transition was smooth, suspiciously smooth. No assassinations, no civil war, no horse consuls, just a clean transfer of power, unheard of. The people waited for disaster. Instead, they got charm. Titus was handsome, charismatic, a war hero. He'd crushed the Jewish revolt and returned with enough spoils to finish the Colosseum. He threw lavish games, gladiators, wild beasts, naval battles. The public roared. Then the gods retaliated. In August, Mount Vesuvius erupted. Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, buried. Entire cities turned to ash sculptures in seconds. Letters stopped. Trade collapsed. The sky went dark. Rome stared south and collectively gasped. Well, that escalated. Titus responded. He didn't blame the gods, didn't write a poem. He sent aid. Personally. Gold. Architects. He toured the disaster zones. held funerals, hugged orphans. He didn't perform grief, he managed it. The people loved him more. Then Rome caught fire, literally. A massive blaze swept through the city in 80 AD. Temples, homes, libraries gone. Before the ashes cooled, a plague swept in. Fever, blood, death. Gods again? Titus didn't flinch. He opened the palace to refugees, sold his own possessions for aid, visited plague wards without fanfare, spoke softly, gave generously, and somehow smiled. One senator called him too good to rule. Another accused him of making emperorship look easy. That was probably the greatest insult available at the time, but not everyone adored him. Some elites feared his kindness, saw it as weakness. Others hated how commoners cheered him. One muttered, "He governs with hugs and food rations," but it worked. Titus did nothing flashy. He reigned with restraint, honesty, competence, a strange cocktail in a city still hungover from Nero's glitter orgies. He refused to execute senators, refused to rob temples, refused to sing in public. And then he died. Suddenly? Fever? Poison? Maybe. His brother Domitian looked too pleased on his deathbed. Titus whispered, "I have made but one mistake." He never said what it was. Rome mourned. The Senate declared him a god. The people wept in the streets. Historians called him the darling of the human race. Even critics paused. For once, an emperor died without riots, statues toppled, or blood-soaked letters to the provinces. No madness, no opera, just legacy. Titus was loved. Domitian was noticed. When he ascended the throne in 81 AD, no riots broke out, no festivals either. Just silence, a heavy, uneasy silence, like a lion had entered a nursery. He was young, ambitious, sharp, and obsessed with mirrors. Domitian didn't want to rule Rome. He wanted to perfect it, sculpt it, shave its rough edges, control every breath it took, and ensure it whispered thank you after. He began with titles. Caesar. Too common. He preferred Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, not as metaphor, as policy. Coins were minted, statues commissioned, priests adjusted prayers, bureaucrats adjusted spines. Then came order. Domitian believed in structure. Clean streets, honest taxes, mandatory grovelling. He reviewed every budget, audited governors, reinstated moral laws. Adultery was outlawed, horoscopes banned. Public applause was scheduled. Private criticism was fatal. He expanded the palace, but also the prison. Torture chambers grew larger, walls thicker, spies ubiquitous. Neighbours informed on neighbours, slaves wore expressions as neutral as possible. Domitian's court became a theatre of terror. You clapped at the right time, laughed at his jokes, wept when he frowned. One senator sneezed during an imperial speech. His family disappeared by sunset. Domitian called it loyalty. Rome called it exhausting. He loved detail, personally reviewed treason trials, inspected grain shipments, measured gladiator performances. His inspectors reported on weather, market rumours, and senator facial tics. He even had informants in bathhouses. Nothing escaped him except affection. He lived in paranoia. His halls were mirrored, his chambers sealed. He had ceilings modified to prevent assassins from crawling through. He slept irregular hours, trusted no one. Even his wife was watched. To outsiders, Rome looked efficient. Aqueducts ran smoothly. Temples gleamed. Taxes were collected. The army, praised and pampered, adored him. Borders were fortified. Barbarian incursions repelled. But inside, Rome flinched. Poets fled. Philosophers vanished. Satirists were executed or very quiet. The arts withered. Drama became docile. History censored. Domitian commissioned busts of himself, thousands. Not smiling, not noble, just staring. Everywhere. He hosted grand festivals, declared divine visions, danced with fear and thunder, but still something cracked. It began in whispers. A senator said too much. A freedman said too little. Guards whispered of gold. Slaves smuggled notes. The plot thickened. On September 18th, 96 AD, Domitian was stabbed in his bedroom, by servants, by advisors, by those who smiled daily. He died clutching a mirror. The Senate rejoiced. They passed a decree of damnatio memoriae, erasing his name from monuments, records, and statues. They couldn't erase the fear, but they tried. Domitian had ruled for 15 years, and all Rome remembered was the silence. When the Senate picked Nerva as emperor, the reaction wasn't celebration, it was relief and disbelief. He was old, 65, wrinkled, wobbly, more parchment than politician. He'd spent decades in bureaucratic shadows, a survivor, too mild for Nero, too harmless for Domitian. Now, emperor. Not by ambition, by accident. After Domitian's dramatic stab fest, Rome needed anyone who wouldn't stab back. Nerva fit the description. His first act, survive the room. The Senate adored him. No more mirror worship, no more god titles, just polite decrees and awkward public addresses. Nerva promised to restore liberty. The word hadn't been used in 20 years. The people blinked. Liberty, how quaint. He freed political prisoners, recalled exiles, gave land to the poor, even returned confiscated property. Noble, thoughtful, doomed. Because liberty didn't feed armies. The Praetorian Guard, still drunk on Domitian's gold and fear, grew restless. They weren't paid, they weren't punished, they were ignored. Worst of all, they weren't feared. Then the coup happened, a minor mutiny, just enough to remind Nerva that emperors didn't last on moral speeches alone. They stormed the palace, demanded blood. Specifically, the heads of those who killed Domitian. Nerva refused. They handed him a knife. He cried. They did it anyway. Nerva survived, barely. But the message was clear. The old Rome was dead. Reform needed teeth, or at least a spine. So Nerva made the smartest decision of his reign. He adopted Trajan, a general, respected, beloved by the army, uncorrupted by Rome's politics, mostly because he'd spent years bashing barbarians at the borders. The announcement stunned Rome. An emperor choosing a successor? In advance, not a relative, not a sycophant? Revolutionary. The army cheered, the Senate exhaled, the people shrugged, but with a hint of hope. Nerva's reign lasted 15 months. He died peacefully, in bed, no poison, no knife, no flute solo. He ruled gently, apologized often, and handed off the throne before the roof collapsed again. Rome didn't worship him, but for once, it didn't curse him either. Trajan was what Rome had always claimed to be: tall, stoic, relentless, the kind of man who sharpened his sword with Senate scrolls. When he became emperor in 98 AD, people were skeptical. He smiled too little, fought too much. He'd spent more time at the empire's edges than in its palaces. Perfect. His first move? War. Dacia, modern-day Romania, was rich in gold and very independent, a problem Trajan solved with 2 invasions, a lot of screaming, and an absurd amount of Roman discipline. The battles were brutal. Sieges, starvation, forest ambushes, decapitations, more sieges. Dacia fought like wolves. Rome fought like Rome. Eventually, the wolves bled out. Trajan annexed the territory, pillaged its mines, dragged back treasure, prisoners, and a complete national humiliation. Rome roared. The Senate clapped like trained seals. Temples were built, triumphs paraded. A new column was raised, literally. Trajan's column, a spiral of carved death. His biography in bas-relief, corpses etched in stone, victories stacked like firewood. It was art. Then came infrastructure, aqueducts, roads, forums, the largest shopping complex in the ancient world. He built like a man racing time, or guilt. Everything bigger, cleaner, straighter. Public baths named after him. Libraries too. If you lived in Rome and didn't see Trajan's face, you were probably dead. And yet, he wasn't a narcissist. He didn't demand divine worship, didn't stage operas, didn't build golden palaces. He just built and bled. The people loved him. So did the army. Trajan paid on time. Promoted talent. Joined his soldiers in the mud. Ate with them. Fought beside them. Drank more than's healthy. Made war look like leadership. He expanded the empire to its largest extent. Mesopotamia, Armenia, Arabia, Petraea. From Scotland to the Persian Gulf, Rome stretched like an overfed eagle. The map looked like a boast, but conquest had a price. Supply lines stretched thin, revolts simmered, economies buckled. Governors squinted at the budget and wondered, do we need all of this? Trajan didn't care. He was busy planning a war with Parthia, another long, bloody, sandy death fest. Then he got sick. On campaign, fever, strokes, old age catching up with ambition. He died in 117 AD, in the east, far from Rome, carried home like a relic. The Senate deified him. The people mourned. Even his critics struggled. He'd killed thousands, enslaved cities, raised taxes, and yet they missed him because he didn't pretend. He conquered honestly, ruled consistently, died loyally. Every emperor after would be compared to him. Most would fail. Only Trajan could build an empire on blood and still be called Optimus Princeps. The best ruler, Hadrian inherited the world and immediately told it to stop growing. Rome gasped after Trajan's glorious bloat. Everyone expected more conquest, more maps, more limbs to the empire's already overstretched body. But Hadrian took one look at Mesopotamia and muttered, "Nope." He pulled back, abandoned some gains, fortified the rest. Critics screamed betrayal. Hadrian called it strategy. Then he built a wall. In Britannia, northern England, where freezing rain met hairy tribes with bad dental hygiene. Hadrian's Wall, 73 miles of imperial no thank you, slicing through the wilderness like a marble shrug. It wasn't just defense, it was a message. The empire ends here, and Hadrian liked boundaries. He toured the provinces endlessly, inspected legions, corrected governors, visited temples, slept with local officials, politically or otherwise. He was hands-on, also hands everywhere. He styled himself as philosopher king, grew a beard rare for Roman emperors, studied Greek, wrote poetry, quoted Plato mid-military drills, painted himself as the new Augustus. If Augustus also hosted symposiums about sculpture over brunch, Rome was confused. Was he a soldier or a scholar? The answer was yes. Hadrian reorganized the army, streamlined bureaucracy, boosted trade, strengthened borders. He wore armor in the morning and discussed stoicism at night, a living contradiction in sandals. Then came Antinous, a Greek youth, beautiful, quiet, possibly brilliant, definitely beloved. Hadrian met him during a tour in Bithynia. They became inseparable. The emperor and the boy, mentor and muse, or something more. Rome raised eyebrows. Hadrian didn't care. They hunted together, studied together, shared rooms. Hadrian wrote poems about his hair, commissioned statues. Whispers spread. The Senate looked politely away. Then tragedy. In 130 AD, Antinous drowned in the Nile. Mysteriously, accident, suicide, sacrifice. Hadrian shattered. He wept, publicly, ordered temples built, cities renamed, statues raised across the empire. He declared the boy divine. Antinous became a god, worship from Egypt to Gaul. Rome panicked. No emperor had ever deified a lover, especially one who couldn't vote. It wasn't just grief. It was obsession carved in marble. Hadrian's later years grew darker. Paranoia crept in. He executed senators, banished critics, micromanaged everything. His health declined, his grief deepened. His empire remained mostly stable, but colder. By the time he died in 138 AD, Rome exhaled. He had ruled for 21 years, built monuments, preserved borders, reimagined power, and immortalized a boy no one truly understood. After Hadrian's heartbreak, Rome expected drama. Instead, they got Antoninus Pius. No wars, no scandals, no boy gods, just paperwork. Antoninus ruled for 23 years. In that time, he never led an army, never expanded the empire, never stabbed a senator in the bath. Historians had to squint to find conflict. Some called it peace, others called it boring. But Rome thrived. He started with respect. To Hadrian, his adoptive father. Though Hadrian had executed senators and built shrines to drowned lovers, Antoninus insisted on honouring his memory. The Senate grumbled. Antoninus didn't flinch, hence the nickname Pius. Pious, dutiful, loyal. He reigned from his villa. Not battlefields. His wars were legal ones, fought in scrolls and speeches. He revised laws, protected slaves, expanded rights for women, encouraged fair trials. He made bureaucracy fashionable. Senators adored him. He listened, consulted, agreed. He didn't demand worship. He hosted discussions. Banquets were calm, executions rare. Spies? Fewer. Sculptures? Tasteful. He even loved his wife, Faustina the Elder. Not a scandal magnet, not murdered, not deified with a tragic backstory, just a partner. When she died, Antoninus mourned deeply, built a temple, then didn't remarry. It was confusing. Where was the madness? The operatic grief? The divine cats? Instead, there were aqueducts, new roads, hospitals, coin stability, an emperor who balanced the budget, and then said, "You're welcome." The people barely noticed, which, for Rome, was a miracle. But critics still sneered. They called him passive, weak, said his peace was apathy, that he kept the empire warm while it slowly cooled. One philosopher wrote, he fed the house while the roof cracked. Still, it was hard to argue with results. Borders held, cities grew, plagues paused, taxes stayed tolerable. The empire, for a brief, shining moment, looked like a republic that had survived itself. Antoninus avoided spectacle. His most dramatic act, building a short defensive wall in Britain north of Hadrian's, it wasn't glamorous, just practical. He never left Italy. Governors managed the provinces. Generals handled barbarians. Antoninus wrote letters, thousands, detailed, gentle, firm. His hobbies included philosophy and not murdering senators. Even his death was polite. In 161 AD, he ate cheese, took a nap, and didn't wake up. No poison, no scandal, no screams. He was deified. The Senate cried. The empire blinked, realizing it had just lived through a golden age too quiet to notice. He wanted to be a philosopher. Instead, he became a general. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic, the thinker, the man who read Epictetus before breakfast and issued death warrants by dusk. He inherited peace from Antoninus Pius. And then the world reminded him, peace is just war taking a breath. The Danube exploded first. Germanic tribes, Marcomanni, Quadi, Jazyges, surged over the northern borders, pushed by others, hungry, desperate. Marcus, barely crowned, had to trade scrolls for swords. He marched north, in the mud-soaked forests of Pannonia. He led legions, not from a throne, but from a tent, frostbitten, sleepless, scribbling meditations between cavalry charges. His meditations, a book never meant to be published, stoic thoughts, memos to himself, notes like, "The obstacle is the way," "You're a soul carrying a corpse, and stop whining." Meanwhile, Rome kept whining. A plague spread, brought back from the east by Lucius Verus, his co-emperor and brother-in-law. The Antonine Plague, possibly smallpox, possibly divine spite. It killed millions. Priests wept, doctors collapsed, Marcus sighed. Then Verus died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, possibly poison, possibly luck. Marcus ruled alone. He tightened defences, taxed gently, wrote more philosophy, fought harder. He didn't believe in cruelty, but reality rarely asked his opinion. The Marcomannic Wars dragged on. Brutal, repetitive, forest skirmishes, frozen rivers, ambushes. He won, eventually. But each victory felt like a band-aid on a corpse. Meanwhile, his son grew Commodus, beautiful, athletic, not bright, loved gladiators, hated books. Marcus hoped he'd improve. He didn't. But Marcus loved him, and that was the problem. The Senate expected a successor to match the philosopher king. Marcus gave them a teenager who greased his hair with olive oil and pretended to be Hercules. Tragedy, meet legacy. Marcus kept writing, kept fighting. His wife, Faustina the Younger, died during campaign. Another blow, he mourned quietly. The meditations got darker. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say. In 180 AD, while still at war, Marcus died. On the Danube, in his tent, with snow outside and scribbles by his cot. The Senate deified him. The people whispered prayers, and Commodus became emperor. History didn't just close a chapter, it dropped the scroll in a puddle. Marcus Aurelius left behind a stoic journal. Commodus left behind a flaming arena. Crowned at age 19, Commodus was raised on silk, not strategy. Philosophy bored him, discipline annoyed him. His role model, Hercules, but not the myth, the statue. He liked the muscles. His first decree? A parade. Not for war, not for victory, for himself. Dressed in lion skins, club in hand. He marched through Rome and declared, "I am Hercules reborn." The gods would have objected, but they'd stopped answering Rome's calls. He renamed the months after himself. 12 of them. Commodus, Commodinus, Commodatember. Rome tried to keep up. The Senate gagged politely. His next step? Rename Rome. He called it Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. He rebranded the empire. Statues of Hercules, with his face. Coins, with his muscles. Temples, to himself. The emperor had become a brand, and the brand demanded blood. He became a gladiator, not metaphorically, literally. He fought in the Colosseum, armed, armoured, against disabled opponents, occasionally animals, sometimes tied up senators dressed as monsters. He never lost, shocking. The people roared, not in joy, in fear. Each appearance cost the treasury a fortune. But Commodus was pleased. He declared, "Only I can save Rome from boredom." He executed rivals, then friends, then family. Anyone who didn't cheer loud enough was accused of treason, or conspiracy, or both. Heads rolled, daily. The Senate begged for sanity. Commodus offered slogans. He abandoned the administration, delegated everything to corrupt favourites. First Cleander, a former slave turned power broker, then others, all worse. Rome was auctioned in pieces. Riots erupted. A famine struck. Blame shifted. Cleander was torn apart by an angry mob. Commodus wept for himself. He withdrew into fantasy, wore gladiator gear daily, practiced speeches in mirrors, imagined divine applause. had statues built, Hercules strangling enemies who looked suspiciously like senators. Then came the bathhouse. In 192 AD, his mistress, Marcia, discovered his plan to execute her, along with other traitors, a list that changed hourly. She acted first. Poison failed, so his wrestling coach, Narcissus, strangled him in his tub. Rome exhaled loudly. The Senate declared him a public enemy, erased his name, burned his images. Gladiators drank quietly. Commodus had ruled for 12 years. Rome had survived, but barely. Commodus was dead. Rome cheered briefly. Then it panicked. With the throne empty, everyone reached for it at once, like a drunken game of musical daggers. The year was 193 AD. 5 emperors would claim the purple. Only one would survive. First came Pertinax, a senator, old, honest, brave, and foolish enough to think reform was still possible. The Senate adored him. The people tolerated him. The Praetorian Guard hated him. He tried to clean up after Commodus, cut spending, disciplined the army, restored dignity. Within 3 months, he was stabbed 300 times in the palace courtyard. Next came Didius Julianus. He didn't inherit the throne, he bought it. Literally. The Praetorian Guard held an auction. In armour, at the palace gates, Julianus outbid everyone, promising each soldier 25,000 sesterces. Rome had been sold to the highest bidder. The Senate gasped. The people revolted. They pelted him with food during public appearances, chanted "robber" in the streets. Julianus, now emperor, watched from his balcony, miserable, rich, completely alone. Meanwhile, in the provinces, 3 generals took notes. Septimius Severus in Pannonia, Clodius Albinus in Britain, Pescennius Niger in Syria, all declared themselves emperor. Rome was now a chessboard dipped in blood. Severus moved first. He marched toward Rome, fast, organized, unstoppable. Julianus panicked, tried speeches, then bribes, then prayers. None worked. The Senate, sensing the breeze of change, switched sides mid-sentence. Julianus was executed in the palace, after 66 days as emperor. His last words, "But what wrong have I done?" Rome didn't answer. Severus entered the city in triumph. No gold, no parade, just legions behind him and justice in his eyes. Or so he claimed. He purged the Praetorian Guard, replaced them with his own men, promised stability, then prepared for civil war. Because Niger and Albinus were still breathing, the empire split. East versus west, loyalty versus ambition, Severus versus everyone. But that's a story for next time. In the meantime, Rome had learned a lesson. Don't put your throne on the auction block. Septimius Severus didn't walk into power, he marched. Behind him, a professional army. Ahead of him, 2 rivals, a crumbling senate, and the smouldering wreckage of dignity. He offered Rome one thing, order, but only if it obeyed. His first target, Pescennius Niger. The Eastern legions had declared Niger emperor. Popular, experienced, unfortunately, not Severus. In 194 AD, Severus crossed Asia Minor like a plague in armour. His legions swept through city after city. He met Niger at Issus, the same field where Alexander had crushed Persia. Poetic. Niger lost. Severus didn't gloat. He beheaded him and sent the head to Byzantium. The message was clear: loyalty or display case. Next, Clodius Albinus. Originally an ally, now a threat. Albinus declared himself emperor in Britain. Severus smiled, then sharpened his sword. They clashed in Gaul, 197 AD, Battle of Lugdunum. It was one of the bloodiest civil battles in Roman history. Rivers choked with bodies. Spears outnumbered prayers. Severus won. Albinus died, probably twice, if you count what they did to the body. Now, Severus was alone, supreme, He returned to Rome like a surgeon with a bloody scalpel. He didn't just rule, he restructured. The Senate became decoration. They still met, still debated, but only when Severus wasn't talking, which was never. He expanded the military. More pay, more power, more perks. He turned soldiers into kings and emperors into generals. Rome became a barracks. He stationed troops everywhere. Not just borders, cities, towns, forums. If your barber wasn't a veteran, your butcher probably was. He reformed law, courts, taxes. He elevated provincials, promoted African elites, raised equestrians, made Romans grumble. He rewarded loyalty with land, disloyalty with silence. He rebuilt Rome's confidence with iron, but not mercy. His justice was swift, brutal, effective. Executions became predictable. Rebellion became theoretical. He ruled for 18 years. Then came sickness. Old, exhausted. He went on campaign anyway, to Britain to fight northern tribes, to win one last war. He built roads, forts, a new wall, then collapsed on his deathbed. He gave advice to his sons. Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, scorn all others. Then he died. As he'd ruled with military precision, Rome mourned, but only because it didn't dare celebrate. Caracalla didn't become emperor. He claimed it with an axe. Upon his father Severus's death in 211 AD, he was meant to rule jointly with his younger brother, Geta. 2 sons, 1 empire. What could go wrong? Everything. They hated each other, openly, hissed in council meetings, divided the palace with guards, ate meals separately, plotted constantly. Caracalla suggested splitting the empire, east for him, west for Geta. The Senate panicked. Rome hadn't survived civil war to entertain sibling squabbles, so Caracalla proposed a meeting. Neutral ground, peace talks, reconciliation. Geta arrived, unarmed. Within seconds, Caracalla's soldiers stabbed him in their mother's arms. Blood on marble, screams echoing through history. 1 brother down, 1 emperor left. The purges began immediately. Geta's supporters, hundreds, executed. Senators, soldiers, friends, tutors, slaves, even artists suspected of having drawn Geta too favourably. Names erased, statues smashed, coins melted. It was not just murder, it was memory assassination. Rome trembled. Caracalla smiled. He ruled by fear, never subtle, never soft. He dressed like a soldier, lived like one, slept in camps, ate with the army, paid generously, promoted brutality. The soldiers loved him, everyone else less so. But even tyrants need PR. Enter the baths of Caracalla, a massive public complex, marble halls, heated pools, gardens, libraries, sweat chambers, a gift to the people, the biggest in Rome, grand enough to distract from state-sanctioned fratricide. He also passed the Constitutio Antoniniana, a sweeping decree. All free men in the empire were now Roman citizens. Millions suddenly had rights and tax obligations. Historians debated his motives. Was it idealism, a vision of unity, or just a bigger tax base? Either way, Rome grew, in paper, if not in peace. Caracalla idolized Alexander the Great. He wore Macedonian armor, quoted him endlessly, once, during a festival. He ordered a massacre of youth in Alexandria for mocking him. Then he marched east, to Parthia. Victory eluded him, so did sanity. He became increasingly erratic, paranoid, violent. His advisors plotted, his guards plotted. Finally, his own bodyguard, Macrinus, stabbed him on the road, 217 AD. Caracalla died how he ruled, suddenly, brutally, alone. Rome blinked. Again, Rome didn't fall. It unravelled, quietly, slowly, like a marble statue weathered into rubble, still noble, but cracking from within. After Caracalla, emperors became seasonal. Macrinus reigned briefly. Then came Elagabalus, the cross-dressing high priest of the sun god. Then Alexander Severus, who tried being reasonable. Rome wasn't interested. Then the dam broke. The year was 235 AD. The frontiers boiled, the treasury groaned, the army grew bored. Enter Maximinus Thrax, a former peasant 7 feet tall, a soldier's emperor. He ruled from camps, never stepped foot in Rome. The Senate hated him, so they plotted. So he marched on Rome, so they hired assassins, so he died. And the carousel began. In 50 years, Rome would see over 20 emperors. Some ruled for years, others weeks. Many died violently. Some weren't even recognized beyond a single province. Rome had become a warlord's resume builder. Civil wars exploded. Legions turned on each other. Generals wore purple like Halloween costumes. Emperors died in latrines, battlefields, banquet halls. Everyone wanted power. No one wanted the paperwork. Meanwhile, the economy collapsed. Inflation skyrocketed. Coins were debased. Breadlines grew. Tax collectors wept. Trade routes fractured. Entire cities abandoned. Farmers became bandits. Senators became ghosts. Then came the plagues. Diseases swept the empire again. Population shrank. Labour vanished. Superstition soared. Priests offered spells. Emperors offered slogans. Neither helped. Then came the invasions. Goths, Alemanni, Franks, Sassanids. They poured in from all sides, sometimes raiding, sometimes settling, always testing Rome's defences and finding them optional. In 260 AD, the unthinkable happened. The emperor, Valerian, was captured by the Persian king Shapur I. Not killed, captured, humiliated, paraded like a trophy. Legend says he was stuffed, skinned, and used as a footstool. Rome gasped, then pretended it hadn't happened. Meanwhile, entire regions peeled away. The Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east. Local strongmen declared independence, printed coins, hired armies, pretended Rome didn't exist. Rome barely noticed. The Senate clung to rituals, declared gods, deified corpses, lit sacred fires as barbarian tents appeared over the horizon. Hope had become theatre, and yet, somehow, the empire endured. Not by strength, by inertia. The idea of Rome carried more weight than its armies. Eventually, a new emperor would stabilise things, reorganise, refortify, reform. But this was the moment Rome lost its invincibility. It had once conquered the world. Now, it struggled to conquer itself.